Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes are expected and favored to beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and reach the college football playoff and make a deep run. In fact, they are the most popular pick to win it all, to win the 12-team playoff in its inaugural season. And two of Ryan Day's predecessors, Ohio State legends in Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer, have come out and stated their belief that this is the deepest, most talented, most athletically gifted, and consequentially the best Ohio State football roster of all time. To briefly quote Urban Meyer, that's a pretty big statement. They have yet to play, but when you look at the quality of athlete at every position, according to Meyer, he's never seen anything like it. I personally think that's a bunch of malarkey, and we're going to talk about why that is today. And we all know that Ohio State football and Ryan Day are under immense pressure to win it all in 2024, and especially to beat Michigan and win the Big Ten. But I think there are some unreasonable talking points, like Ohio State has to win it all, or the season is a total failure. And along with beating Michigan and winning the Big Ten, that opinion is basically stating this team has to go 16-0, or the season's a total waste. And the natty or bust, as I affectionately or without affection name that opinion, that mindset is appropriate with some very rare teams. I think 2021 Georgia and 2023 Michigan fit the bill, but for a variety of positive reasons for the future and pessimistic reasons for this season, I don't think it fits. So whether it's Tressel and Meyer's opinion, Day's job security, or this Ohio State team or future Ohio State teams, we're going to be talking about all of that on this episode of College Football with Sam. Before we dive deep into these topics, and it's going to be a lot, we're going to be bouncing around, but trust me, this is going to be an awesome video. Hit the like button to help support this channel, and also to get the news and get the content out there, because the more likes this video receives, the more YouTube is going to want to promote this video in its algorithm. That means more people will view this video, more people will be drawn to the College Football with Sam community, this awesome community that we've built here, and more people will be able to share their thoughts in the comments section below. Also, make sure to comment your own thoughts below. And the comment section is so important. It helps me gauge if I missed something, it helps me engage with you, and it helps me to find more content ideas. There have been some videos, many in fact, that have been inspired by comments made in the comments section. So hitting that like button, it's very easy. It helps this channel earn more money, more engagement, more subscribers, and just makes the college football experience on this channel that much better. Also, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content as it relates to Ohio State, the Big Ten, or if it's just a conference prediction video, whether the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, or Big 12, those are coming soon, or a top 25 video, or maybe me talking about my personal All-American team. And of course, very important, I've already mentioned it, but just another reminder, comment your thoughts on this video as you watch down below. And last but certainly not least, if you want to support the channel, it's appreciated but not expected. Check out my merchandise store and Patreon page via the link in the description and down below in a reply to the pinned comment. You can purchase College Football with Sam themed merchandise with Big Ten colors for t-shirts, a black and white hoodie, or even stickers on that store. And if you're a Patreon member, if you're an all-conference member, just $5 a month, you get your name featured at the beginning and end of every video with a shout-out at the end. Same thing applies to all-American members, except you get access to occasional bonus content. That's $10 a month. And the same things apply to the Heisman members. $25 a month, but after 6 months, you get free signed College Football with Sam merchandise, and you get to directly message me whenever you please, and I will reply as soon as possible. But let's get back into the topic of today's video. The topics, rather. First and foremost, I want to talk about Ryan Day and his job, because that's what most of this relates back to. That's why the articles talking about Tressel and Meyer's statements and that whole topic was circulating around YouTube or around the internet as if it was breaking news, like as if it was this groundbreaking thing. And it's also part of the reason why I'm reporting and talking about it today, is because there is immense pressure surrounding Day. but it's not exactly the pressure that everyone's talking about. I have seen articles, I'm not going to link them down below because I don't want to draw attention to them. There are articles saying that Day will be fired and that Dabo Swinney will be hired as Ohio State's head coach, or that Day will be fired and then go to other premier college football programs because Ohio State must be that dumb in the athletic department. It's asinine, and it's insane in its own tier, beyond insanity. And I'd say it's also disrespectful to Ohio State's football program as well. They're a blue blood, and they have crazy expectations, of course, and they should. But they're not outer worldly impossible. The athletic department, much like Gene Smith, knew that Ryan Day is a near elite to elite head coach. I mean, Gene Smith constantly reinforced his faith in Day, as he should have. Day's reached the college football playoff 3 times. He has a 5-7 record versus end-of-season top 10 teams. He helped keep Urban Meyer's teams in 2017 and 18 up to date. He helped them evolve. His worst record with the Buckeyes is 11-2, and he's won a college football playoff game. With Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh leaving the college football head coaching world, his resume, his value is superior to 99% of head coaches. The only one whose value is clearly higher is Kirby Smart at Georgia, who Ryan Day nearly beat in the 2022 Peach Bowl. Day is facing extreme competitive pressure. He is not on the hot seat. His job right now, I'd say, 100% guaranteed safety. Now, if he goes 9-3 or a 10-2 and maybe achieves a third loss, or earns rather a third loss in the college football playoff with a 10-2 record, maybe he'd enter 2025 on some type of hot seat, or the seat would get warmer. But right now, I think his seat's really cool. I just think that Ryan Day knows that he has to perform at an elite level, and he more so wants to perform at an elite level. His locker room does. The athletic department does. That's why they went out and got Caleb Downs and got Quinshaw Judkins and Seth McLaughlin and Will Howard, and the transfers they got, and why they brought back so many near elite players who could have went on to the NFL. That's not because, oh my gosh, he could get fired this year if he loses one game to Michigan, a very important game, but he won't get fired if he loses to Michigan. This is because his staff, and his players want to perform at the highest level. The pressure is competitive. He's not going to get fired if he goes 11-0 and then loses to Michigan at the end of the year. Even if the entire fan base, which will hate it, and many of them would call for his firing, then that won't happen. His job is totally safe. I don't want to get too carried away from that, and we're going to come back to Ryan Day, but I've made a video dispelling myths about Ohio State, and more so Ryan Day. And I'll link that in the top right corner of the screen if you want to watch that video. It's very, very long. I try not to make content that long anymore so I can just be more friendly to users' time. But if you're interested, that link's in the top right corner of your screen. Let's talk about the potential of this team very briefly, from the offensive side and the defensive side. Offensively, Ohio State returns 5 starters and brings back 62% of their 23 production. This unit has plenty of upside, but also questions. Last year was the first year under Ryan Day where the offense wildly underperformed. They finished the year outside of the top 30 in scoring offense. In terms of efficiency, their offense was outside of the top 10. And Marvin Harrison Jr. really carried that team. Wildly carried that team. Best player on the offense. Henderson, when healthy, did, and Cade Stover did as well. 2 of those players are gone off to the NFL, tight end Stover and wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. Despite Marvin Harrison Jr.'s departure, the wide receivers are strong. Jeremiah Smith is going to be awesome this season, might be one of the best receivers in the country as a true freshman. Carnell Tate, some people have forgotten about him, but he'll be good. Brandon Inniss should contribute more. And Emeka Egbuka returns, and if he's healthy, he can be one of the best receivers in the country too. And Quinshaw Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson easily make up the best 1-2 punch in America. They are the strength of the offense, the receivers and the backs. Henderson and Judkins are elite. They've each had a 1,000-yard season, at least one with Henderson, two with Judkins. And Henderson, he's had health issues, which is why bringing in Judkins was so important. But when healthy, he is electric and one of the best running backs in the country. He was one of the best in the nation last year, but his statistics didn't reflect that simply because he missed multiple games. And we don't even need to talk about the receivers. Brian Hartline is a very proven developer and recruiter. And we've seen Egbuka play in college, had an awesome 2022 campaign, and Jeremiah Smith has gotten a lot of buzz, not just in football camp with the Buckeyes, who have a very good defense, so that helps build the credibility there, but also in high school. And quarterback and the offensive line, these are the areas with questions. Howard was only 25th in quarterback efficiency rating in 2023. McCord, meanwhile, was top 10. And the offensive line didn't allow tons of sacks, less than 20, but the run blocking was disgusting. I mean, I'm watching on some run plays earlier in the season especially, offensive linemen are blocking each other, like the memed video of the Florida offensive linemen blocking each other. That literally happened with Ohio State's offensive line. The potential of the offense is very high, but the quarterback and the O-line are arguably the most important positions on offense, and those are the areas with the biggest questions, along with tight end. On defense, Jim Knowles returns most of what was a generational defense in 2023. They return 9 starters, bring back 60% of their production from 2023. The unit last year was all-time elite. You look at S&P Plus rankings, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because that's paid content from Bill Connolly. He does a wonderful job at ESPN. That defense was ranked ahead of 2021 Georgia, 2022 Georgia, and 2023 Georgia. It was neck and neck with last year's Michigan defense. I just think last year's Michigan defense had a higher ceiling and was more clutch. They were willing to be more aggressive, while Ohio State's defense, I think, was a little too conservative for their own good, and it helped pay off. Michigan's defense was one of the best defenses of all time. Ohio State's was only slightly worse statistically. In terms of the eye test, they were only a little worse. Therefore, they're up there too. And bringing back 9 starters, upgrading their DB room with Caleb Downs, making James Laurinaitis the linebackers coach to help delegate Jim Knowles' responsibility. I think it's great. I think this defense is set to once again be one of the best in the country. And the secondary, that's the best unit, maybe in the country. You have Denzel Burke. You have Jordan Hancock. Those are 2 of the best corners in the country. They have NFL futures. Caleb Downs, maybe the best DB in the country. Burke, even maybe Hancock could contend for that too. You get my point. And then they have Igbinosun, Lathan Ransom returns, and there are other players who are just slipping my mind or they're in the second string who are great and who would start in most secondaries in college football. Iowa and Michigan have some of the best secondaries in college football, and I bet you some of Ohio State's second stringers would start in those defensive lineups because Ohio State's defensive back room doesn't just have better starters than anyone else. They have better depth than anyone else. If Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel's quotes were solely applied to the secondary, they would be 1,000% correct. That's how strong the secondary is. They were first in pass yards per game allowed last year and first in average rating allowed in 2023. And that was with a run defense that was not nearly as good as Michigan's last year and wasn't as good or about the same, depending on whether you view the eye test, big games, or statistics, as Penn State's last year. And they were awesome. They bring back a lot of talent in that secondary. The weak link is either the linebacker core or the D-line. But I said weak link solely because those units are not as strong as the secondary. Those should be powerful, especially the defensive line, who returns Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, who kind of had a breakout year last season, and JT Tuimoloau. The defensive line's weakness is that it's lacked upside. The pass rush was not extremely good last year, though I think part of that was just due to the conservative nature of the defense. And the linebacker core, they lose both starters. Eichenberg and Chambers are gone, but C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles and Cody Simon give that room some depth, upside, and a nice blend of experience on top as well. I wanted to talk about the roster for Ohio State to set the background, because Ryan Day is, again, as I've said, a near elite to elite head coach. But I can't only talk about Day. I have to talk about the team, because a coach can be near elite to elite. I think Kyle Whittingham is in this category at Utah. But Kyle Whittingham doesn't have Ohio State's players. He doesn't have Georgia's players, Alabama's players. I've said on this channel before, I think development and coaching is more important than recruiting. I think in part because of recruiting services and all the hype surrounding them, recruiting has become overrated. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable. And to the people who've said that I've said that, you're lying. You're being intellectually dishonest. Recruiting is absolutely critical. It's very important. But if you do not have the head coach to put those recruits together, well, you get Tom Herman. You get Larry Coker. You get Ed Orgeron. You get Brady Hoke. And outside of that 2019 season at LSU, Coker's initial seasons, and those teams were GOAT rosters. When you don't have a GOAT roster, even if you have an elite roster and your head coach ain't that good, your team sucks. And it's humiliating, and you already forget what he won and you shove him out. It's what happened with Coker. It's what happened with Orgeron. Tom Herman didn't win much, neither did Brady Hoke, but no one cared eventually about their good recruiting. Get out of here. You're not winning us things. Day has won things. He's had successful years. He's also had, especially recently, some underwhelming years. Combining who Day is, what this roster is, some of the questions on offense, defense, the high ceiling or maybe lack thereof at all positions that I just expressed to you, that I showed you on the screen. What is success and what is failure for this Ohio State team? I do not think this is a national title or bust year for Ohio State. I said that in the introduction, and we're going to get more into why that is. But the bar is really high, and I mean really high. Like, you got to beat Michigan at least once. And I say at least once because, take, for example, 2022. If Michigan beats TCU and Ohio State beats Georgia, they rematch for the title, and Ohio State beats Michigan, that would sting. And that's coming from a Michigan fan. But a 14-1 season where you go 1-1 against a national championship team and you destroyed them in their house, that's not a failure year. The end stung, but that's different from it being a failed season. And it's hard to beat a good team twice. So at least beating U of M once, that's more than reasonable. That should be very doable, especially with the game being in Columbus. Winning the Big Ten with a 12-0 record, I think that's fairly reasonable. I think Michigan's very underrated. They're still one of the best teams in the Big Ten. If Ohio State can beat Michigan, and they certainly can, they can beat anyone else on their schedule. And reaching at least the college football playoff Final Four, at least reaching the semifinals, I think all of those are non-negotiables. I do. If the Buckeyes achieve all of those goals, but don't win at all, I don't think the season can be defined as a failure. If they fail two of them, let's say they don't beat Michigan at all, or they beat Michigan, but then they lose in Indy to maybe Michigan, Oregon, or Penn State, and then they get upset in one of the first rounds of the college football playoff, then I'd agree the year is a disappointment. Of course, those expectations are very relative. They're very fluid. I'm not saying those are the expectations or how they should be. This is just from my personal perspective. I think this team has enough questions, but also enough talent coming in year after year after year that I don't think this is a national title or bust year for Ohio State. Michigan last year, for example, you knew they were going to lose a ton, and they don't have the top 10 or top 5 recruiting to where it's a guarantee that they can be a potentially greatest of all time team year after year after year. Now, last year, the way they won it all, the development they had, the defense, the offense, and Michigan's gaining some recruiting steam. I think their staff is still good. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're an exception to the rule like late 2010's Clemson. But if Ohio State doesn't win it all this year, especially with some talent that I think they have who are young, they can absolutely win it all next year. In fact, maybe, especially when you consider quarterback play, maybe next year they have a better chance. Who knows? That could be a bold opinion of mine. Now I want to dive back into Ryan Day. I want to defend him a little bit. Ryan Day is a coach who is held to almost an impossible standard. Kirby Smart, same thing. Nick Saban, same thing. The difference is Nick Saban is the greatest of all time head coach, and he retired. And Kirby Smart's won 2 national titles in the past 3 years, and 14-1, 15-0. It's 29-1. He has a 42-2 record over the past 3 years. No postseason losses, as in bowl games or college football playoff games. 2 SEC title losses to the greatest of all time head coach. Day doesn't have that. He's close to those things, but he is also so far. What I want to defend Day on before I get to the criticism is the fact that Urban Meyer, legend, Hall of Fame head coach, he relied on Day to improve his team. And when Day inherited what Meyer left him, he improved upon it. 2019 is the best example of that. And you may say, oh, well, that was with all of Urban's players. Look at the power rankings, the S&P Plus numbers, FPI. Also watch how this team plays. There are some things where Urban was better at. I think toughness. I think Urban's teams were meaner. I think they were calmer in big games. More so against Michigan. I think outside of the Michigan games, Day is pretty level-headed, very wise, very on-point tactical. I think the Peach Bowl is the perfect example of that. In FPI, SP+, and I'd say on-field results, this team on average is more impressive than the later Urban Meyer teams, like the 15, 16, 17, and 18 teams compared to all of Day's teams on average. I would take Day's teams. I just would. Better quarterback play. Last year showed that Day can have a good defensive team. He's not like Lincoln Riley where he only specializes in offense. He can also create a great defense as well and utilize the talent there. He's a young head coach who continues to evolve. Again, looking at the hiring of Jim Knowles, the fact that he hasn't completely cleaned house on his staff every year after a loss to Michigan, nor should he. By the way, that also shows his job security. If he was actually on the hot seat, there would have been more people fired from last year's staff, in my opinion, including head strength and conditioning coach Mickey Marotti. Day makes adjustments when necessary, in my opinion. Sometimes overdoes it, sometimes underdoes it, but makes adjustments and great ones. Every single year as well, either the defense, offense, or even both have been elite and generationally efficient. Look at the offense in 2021 and 2022. Generational. Could have been 2019 LSU level if the Michigan game panned out differently, or more importantly, if the defense was better. And both of those things, had other changes been made, were possible. It's a game of what ifs, I know, but the talent was there. And last year's defense, statistically, analytically, generational. And 2019 Ohio State was one of the best teams of all time. Where my criticism comes in is Ryan Day has not maximized his team's talent at any season. He just hasn't. And it's very hard to do that. Only a few coaches have ever done it. Very few, a handful. And I'd say even some of the teams that have won the national championship have not maximized their win total or talent. I think Georgia in 2021 could have beat Alabama in the title game, the SEC title game, but they didn't. They still won it all. I think last year's Michigan team did not maximize, and maybe some of this was the fact that Sharon Moore became the full offensive coordinator with all those duties and couldn't exactly coach the O-line in the same way. I don't think Michigan's offense came close, in fact, to maximizing the talent they had last year. Donovan Edwards had a pretty down year. The O-line did not perform close to the ceiling it had until the college football playoff came around. And there are other teams you could point to. 2014 Ohio State. They could have beaten Virginia Tech and gone 14-0, but they lost to Virginia Tech and thankfully got in and won it all. Ryan Day has not maximized his team's talent or win total any season, and at a program like Ohio State, you have a right to criticize that. Michigan, I thought about phrasing this differently, but I think it's appropriate. Michigan owns him, and that's not an exaggeration, because when you look at how Day often, especially in 21 and 22, I actually think he did a pretty good job coaching what he had in 23 against the Wolverines, mostly because I think Michigan last year was actually a significantly better team and even roster than what Ohio State had. And yet, Ohio State played Michigan competitively, could have beaten them, didn't, but easily could have. In the 21 and 22 games, emotional decisions were made. There was erratic play calling, and the team at some point just broke. That's the definition of one team owning another. Now, that could change this year. That very well could change. In fact, I lean toward it likely changing because the game is in Columbus. Ohio State returns more. And if I thought that Ohio State had a roster that was lacking or a head coach that was lacking in terms of beating Michigan, I'd tell you. And I'd already come out and say that Michigan's going to win the Big Ten again. But I haven't said that because Michigan loses a ton, and outside of Ohio State returning a lot, there are some other contenders that return much too and also have good head coaches or good staffs. And one side of the ball has always been elite under Day, but outside of 2019, whether it's the defense every year until last or the offense last year, one side of the ball is lacking or inefficient in some way. Now what I want to move on to is talking about the other contenders, the teams that Ohio State has to face. This is going to be very brief, but I just want to put some perspective because the expectation is that this Ohio State team is going to be one of the better teams of all time in Ohio State history, per Tressel, per Meyer. I see that expectation with a lot of Ohio State fans. And look, I mean, Ohio State, they should win the Big Ten. They should beat Michigan just by the talent they have, by the odds that are out there. But who are they facing? What's their competition? Well, let's start off with Michigan. Michigan only returns 5 starters and 40% of their production from last year. They bring in the 19th recruiting class overall, transfer portal and high school. And despite how much they lose, this team will be strong at running back, tight end, both sides of the line of scrimmage, linebacker, defensive back, and special teams. Donovan Edwards is going to be elite. The offensive line has plenty of players who still have some snaps. They brought in Josh Preby, who is an honorable mention offensive lineman. I would expect Miles Hinton to be one of the best offensive linemen in the Big Ten this year. They return Colston Loveland. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore, and Josiah Stewart, I actually think make up the best defensive line in the country. And that's debatable, but when you solely focus on the tackle room, that's not debatable. That's the best defensive tackle room in college football. And Will Johnson, Makari Page, Quentin Johnson, incoming cornerback Amir Hall, they'll make up a great secondary room, one of the better secondary rooms in the country. Not like Ohio State's, but elite nonetheless. This team loses a lot, but I think their depth from last year will show. I think this Michigan team will show how deep last year's Michigan team was, because many of this year's starters were backups last year, and while last year's team will be better, obviously, than this year's Michigan team, Michigan in 2024, I think, will be able to still physically impose their will, play elite defense, and have some wrinkles and some tricks up their sleeve on both sides of the ball. Michigan is Ohio State's most important opponent. And if Ohio State's offensive line, which has questions, if they're not elite and they face up against this defense, they will have problems. There's no debating that. That doesn't mean Ohio State will lose, because Michigan has a ton of questions, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And I don't think they have the depth at secondary or perhaps even at linebacker that Ohio State has. And it's on the road. But if Ohio State is to be the most talented roster of all time in Buckeye history, not talking about college football, but Buckeye history, should they even have problems with this Michigan team? Should they? Because when I look at this depth chart that Ohio State provides, Michigan still has some good matchups against this team, especially on the line of scrimmage. Just that the question mark of the offensive line, that alone makes this game against Michigan anything but a guaranteed win. It will still be a hard-fought game, one where Ohio State's favored and will likely be favored, but still hard-fought. And for Oregon, I think it's a similar story. Oregon returns a lot more than Michigan, 10 starters, 69% of their 2023 production, and they bring in the 4th overall recruiting class. They'll be strong at quarterback with Dylan Gabriel, running back with Jordan James, wide receiver with Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. On the offensive line, Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly Jr. make up one of the best offensive tackle rooms in the country, I think the best in the Big Ten. Their defensive line with Derek Harmon, with Mateo Uyunglele, and with Jordan Birch will be great. And at defensive back, they have great players there as well, including Jalil Florence. They brought in Jabbar Muhammad. They could dominate the Big Ten. They could also struggle. This team has a lower floor than people believe, and they still have a very high ceiling. I mean, there's a reason why this team is ranked top 4 in most preseason rankings. It's very appropriate. They have the coordinators, the head coach, to win big, in my opinion. Michigan staff, I didn't touch too much on them. They have a young head coach in Sharon Moore, and they have a mostly new staff, but it's very familiar to what Michigan staff in 2023 was, and it's very familiar to what a typical Big Ten staff is, just maximized and elite instead of what an average Big Ten staff is. Oregon staff adds a little bit of a different flavor, a little bit of Pac-12 flavor to their staff. They, like Ohio State, have been prolific on offense on average over the past three seasons, really, with Oregon 21 having an but still good offense. Same with Ohio State in 23. And Oregon's defense this year, they return a ton. They upgraded using the portal majorly on both sides of the football. And with them hosting Ohio State, that'll be a game to pay attention to. And that is not a given either. It isn't. Oregon is one of the highest ceilings out of all the teams Ohio State plays. I think they have the highest ceiling out of all the teams Ohio State plays. The teams that can stop Georgia, I think, are Alabama in the SEC and Oregon and Ohio State. And I would rank Alabama ahead of Oregon and Ohio State, and there's a chance that Oregon would have a better chance than the Buckeyes, and I think they would have a better chance at stopping Georgia, just due to the fact that they are more secure on the offensive line and at quarterback. I think Oregon could be a more balanced team than Ohio State, a team that is better prepared to compete in the college football playoff rather than the Big Ten, which is how Ohio State operated in 21 and 22. They were built to compete for it all, but not to win the Big Ten. Ryan Day has changed that, and I know that this team's better built to compete for the Big Ten than it was 2 years ago. Is it equipped to win a national title in the same way that the 2022 Ohio State team was? We'll just have to see. The defense for Ohio State must come to play versus Oregon's offense, and the defense is generationally talented, the secondary is proven and awesome, but like last year, there are some questions up front, and Oregon, with their O-line, their running back, and their offense, they will take advantage of any mistake that Ohio State's defense makes, any imperfection. And last but not least, there's Penn State. Penn State, we can keep brief if we want, because I don't think they're at the same level that Michigan and Oregon are. They return more than Michigan. 11 starters, 67% of their production. In fact, they return an additional starter compared to Oregon. But they have questions on the O-line at quarterback. Their secondary is a little thin. It's very thin at corner, but very deep at safety. They bring in the 14th overall recruiting class, and James Franklin just can't win a big game to save his life. The Nittany Lions, however, are strong at running back with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. Tyler Warren is one of the better tight ends in the country. On the defensive line, Abdul Carter, Donnie Dennis Sutton should be an underrated defensive end duo entering this year. They'll be one of the best pressure units, though, and you'll see it for this year. At linebacker, Kobe King comes back, and other players behind him. And at safety, you have Kevin Winston Jr. and I think Zakee Wheatley also comes back. Deep safety room. The offense with Andy Kotelnicki coaching it has an insane potential, a high ceiling as well. History in Ohio State's depth chart says the Lions should be Ohio State's easiest game. Ohio State will have an offensive line that I think has as many questions as Penn State's does. They have a much better defensive line, though, especially when it comes to run stoppage, and they're much more secure in the secondary than Penn State is. They also have better receivers, the chance to have similar or even better quarterback play, a better running back room, and they have a much better head coach. I mean, Ohio State should have an easier time with Penn State than they do Oregon and Michigan. But that could change this year because, again, when you're Ohio State and you have questions on the O-line, you have questions at quarterback, the defense, again, while elite, stopping the run's important, and Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan, what should they be good at doing on offense? Running the ball, especially in 3 to 4 yard chunks, which is where Ohio State struggled last year. It wasn't in allowing big run plays. It was that Notre Dame at times and really Michigan and also Missouri could consistently get enough yards to where they could move the ball and they could score. And then Ohio State's offense, which again, circle back to questions, wasn't elite enough to combine with the defense to be this unstoppable force that maybe they could have been if, let's say, they just had C.J. Stroud at quarterback last year instead of Kyle McCord, or they were better coached at other positions. With Kotelnicki coaching the offense, Penn State could take advantage of some things on Ohio State's defense, and Penn State's defense is going to be legit. Again, if Ohio State doesn't have great QB play or a solid offensive line, Penn State's defense could feast on that offense. Really, to just finish out this video, I don't think this team's all-time talented. I don't. I talked about Ryan Day and also about the strengths and weaknesses of this team, but I really want to circle back to what Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel said. Will Howard could be Ohio State's worst quarterback of the Day era. You may think that's heresy because Kyle McCord had some bad moments last year, but McCord had an 83.8 QBR last year, 7th. Will Howard had a 75.1, 22nd. So correction, I was wrong. 22nd, not 25th. He had a 24 to 10 TDI-INT ratio. Howard did. McCord's was 24 to 6. And yes, McCord had much better receivers, but Will Howard actually had an OC. Ryan Day last year was trying to play CEO and also calling plays. Too much responsibility on his shoulders, obviously. Will Howard had a dedicated OC, which Ohio State will have this season. And he had a better O-line. He had Cooper Beebe and other all-Big 12 and all-American caliber players on his O-line. And he had a healthy running back in DJ Giddens, not a banged-up running back room like last year. Ohio State solved some of those problems, bringing in Quinshon Judkins, bringing in an OC. Again, the Buckeyes have made great moves. They have. And they've gotten better, I think, or at least they're going to be a similar team to last year. At the very minimum, they'll be the same as they were last year. More likely than not, they'll improve. But I don't think they're improving to be one of the best Ohio State rosters of all time. Fields and Stroud were much better quarterbacks than Will Howard is going to be at Ohio State. The tight end room is going to take a step back. Receiver could take a step back. Jeremiah Smith's a freshman. He could be really, really good. He could be an All-American. He could also just be a 5-star freshman that is great in college, but not an All-American yet. And losing Eichenberg, losing Chambers, those are two veterans who won't be easy to replace. Ohio State does not have the same amount of questions as Penn State, Oregon, and Michigan do, but they still have enough questions to where I don't think this team this early should be put in that GOAT conversation. Let them play on the field and see what happens. The defense will be one of the best of the 2000s, though. They will. And the secondaries, I've already said, that's a generational position. So in some regards, I can understand what Meyer and Tressel were saying. But in others, I don't think this team's all-time talented. And in fact, I think that next year, with Sayin getting another year of coaching, Kelly's system being in year 2, and I've heard that Ohio State may be heating up on the recruiting trail on the offensive line, some of those things coming together, maybe we look back and 2025 is the year that Ohio State wins it all, and not 2024. They can win it all this year, absolutely. But again, with the concerns that I listed and just really that's it. I question that. And I don't think the national title or bust mindset for this team especially, and for any team, except for, again, teams that are on a big-time drought or teams that may not necessarily have the talent to year in, year out compete for it all, I don't think that mindset's healthy. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to give a shout out to my Patreon members here. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for sponsoring this video as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Conradl OH, and Ismar for sponsoring this video and channel as All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video and channel as all conference members. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.